Welcome to another episode of an open build session where we are building the Web3 event listener. This is an application that will basically allow us to enter a contract address, list out all the events that that given contract emits, and then allow us to subscribe to any one of those events and then post them to an arbitrary HTTP endpoint. So right now in the last video, what we were able to accomplish was enabling us to input a contract address and then getting a list of the events that that contract fires. We did that using the Etherscan's API. So Etherscan has an API that allows us to go ahead and throw a contract address up to them, and we can go ahead and get back the events. So we're not actually rendering them to the screen yet. So here I have the Figma comp on the screen here, and we have some very simple, very basic comp here, very kind of a proof of concept we're trying to put together. So where we ended up was we have this really simple interface. And if we take a contract address, like for example, this Moonbird's address here, and we plug it in and we hit next, on the console, you're going to see that we now have all of the events that this given contract emits, which is awesome. So now we can use this information to display it to the user and allow them to select what events they want to listen to. Now the goal here is all of the front end work that we're doing here is basically we're going to end up with an object, we'll serialize into JSON, that will define all of the information that the user wants to listen to. So the contract address, the event, and then the URL that they would like to post to. That information, by the end of this video, should be packaged up that we can send to the backend. And then we can start to get creative on the backend on how we're going to keep track of all of the different events that we want to listen to and all the different posts and stuff like that. So that's going to be exciting. So the end point of this video is to be able to basically store these events, display them, and allow users to select them. So let's see what we need to do. Let's jump into the code. So what we have right now is we have right here, we're just basically console logging the events. So the first apparent thing is we need to store these events after we get them. So why don't we go ahead and use another state variable here in order to keep track of these. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say const, and we're going to say events and set events, and then we'll say use state, and we'll keep that as an empty array at first. Now, in order for us to go ahead and set the events, all we have to do is instead of doing this console log, we can go ahead and say set events, and we'll pass in the events. And this will enable us to now store the events in our state within this component, which is great. So now we have the state set, right? Now, with this information, we can go ahead and display the events to the user. Now, we can do this in a bunch of different ways, and we'll probably experiment with this over time. But for now, we just want to get a basic user interface in place. And what I'm thinking is, based on our comp here, we had kind of a multi-step form. I'm thinking we could display all of this on one screen. So we kind of split up the screen into 3 columns. And then each column would contain either the contract address, the events, and then the URL to post to. So let's see how that would work. If we go back to our code here, and now if we go to the actual JSX that we are returning here, we can kind of play around with this a little bit. So why don't we change this to a grid? So we're going to change the entire layout to a grid, and we'll say it's a grid, and we'll say it's 3 columns. So grid cols 3. Now again, we are using Tailwind here to be able to enable us to not have to really write a ton of CSS, which is great. And we'll keep that the way it is here. We'll probably have to adjust some of this, but we'll see. So we'll go ahead and now we're going to add another component to this grid, another column here, and we'll say div class name is equal to, should I make this a little bit bigger? I'm going to go ahead and just zoom in a little bit, and we'll make this grid, and we'll give it, I'm going to give it a little bit of margin. You could probably use grid spacing here too. Now I'll go ahead and close that. So this is where we will list out the events. So let's see. first thing, we want to only list out the events if we actually have events. So we can use this little syntax here. We could say events dot length is greater than 0. And that looks good. Then we'll map that there. So that's good. So then we'll run a map. We'll run over every single event. And we'll make this a function. I'll have to close that here. And let's see, what is it trying to generate here? Again, I am using Copilot, so I'm kind of experimenting with Copilot during this series, and I've been having a pretty good time with it. So this is going to go ahead and return from this map function the JSX we need for each one of these events. Now, this looks pretty good. I don't know if we want to make the layout exactly like this. We could probably make this div, let's give it a border. Let's give it a little rounded kind of edge to it, make it look a little nice. We'll give the border a little, and let's just give this a little bit of padding, and maybe we'll give it a little bit of margin. Okay, so let's see what this tried to do here. So this is giving us a div that has an h1 in it that has the event name and a paragraph that maps out the different inputs that are within the event. So let's see what this looks like. So let's grab that Moonbird's address again. Let's plug this in here. And boom. Okay, not too bad. So we have now a list of all of the events that this fires. We have it in this nice little 3-column layout for our grid. And that's looking pretty good. So let's continue to build this. So I think what we need is we do need some type of radio button, right? So we need something that is going to allow the user to select this, that they want to be able to grab the event. So we'll say name equals event, and the value is going to be, let's give the value the actual index, and we'll use that later to index back into the events array. And instead of making this H1, let's make this an H3, and just make the font bold. You don't have to make it that big. And all right. Now this inputs.map, I think we'll change this a little bit because this was just showing you the type. It wasn't showing you the actual, right? It wasn't. So now we have our radio button here. We can go ahead and select that. Excellent. But now we have this kind of this type here. Let's go ahead and change that a bit. I'm going to go ahead and remove this, and we'll still put it inside of a paragraph. And we're still going to want to map over these bad boys. And let's go ahead and return. And we're going to return. Yes, that looks a little better. Key index input.name. And let's put a dash in between this just to. Okay. Of course, we have to close that. Okay, so now we have the type and then the name of it. So this is still a little approved. Okay, so we're seeing the type and the name. It's a little crunched when you see multiple of them. Okay. Why don't we do input name and then dash type? Just flip that around. Token ID is an unsigned token ID. Owner is an address. Operator. Okay, I think that's fine for now. We can probably clean that up a little bit. Maybe put it into like a list or something like that. But we can see all of the different parameters that are associated with these events, and we can select the events. So awesome. That's looking good. Now we're not actually doing anything once we select these events. that'll be in the next step here. So why don't we go back to our code here. Let's give this a little title here too. Why don't we say events.length, as long as we have events, let's go ahead and output, say, a title. So we'll go ahead and give it an actual h1 here, and we'll say events available, right? And let's give it a little styling here. Class name. I'm kind of digging this this Tailwind for this type of work, because it's just like, once you have the classes down a bit, it's just pretty, we'll say call span 2, so this goes across the whole grid. It's pretty quick to be able to just write these styles in here and be pretty confident that the styling is going to work across different devices and things like that, instead of sitting there kind of tweaking CSS constantly. I don't know who loves to do that. But okay, so now we have the events available, and we have the ability to go ahead and select them. Now the last piece of this is to get some type of input for us to be able to put up a URL that we want to post to. So I realize right now the URL is kind of arbitrary, but I think it's a good starting point for other types of integrations. Things like if I wanted to post to a Slack channel, or maybe send an email, or post to Notion. A lot of this stuff is going to require some type of HTTP request. So I think just from an MVP perspective, getting to an HTTP request makes a lot of sense. Love to hear your comments. If you have any input on other ways to do this, or any ideas, that would be awesome. But let's go ahead and get some inputs for an HTTP endpoint. So we're going to go ahead and put another column into our grid here, and go ahead and just throw that in here like this. We don't need any crazy styling on it. And what we're going to do here now is we're going to only output this again if we have some type of event. So we're going to say events.length is greater than 0, end, and then we'll go ahead and have a bunch of JSX in here. So here we're going to go ahead and put a little input in here. We'll put a little title in here first. We'll say font is bold, and yeah, we'll do that. Text, then we'll say event action. All right, and now we should see, once we have events, this event action, but that doesn't look like it's where we want it to be. Div, event action. We do need to put this, we need to wrap this into, we'll put this into a flex box. That makes sense. We'll put this into a flex box so that it'll and we'll justify it a bit. So why don't we do that? We'll go ahead and say div, and that looks like it might be right. Let's see. Okay, cool. So we'll keep that down there for now. And now let's go ahead and put a little text in here, like what to do when we hear an event, right? That's cool. And then we'll put a little label. We'll create a label for our the URL that we're going to create here, and we'll make this block. We'll make the text gray. What's this? 700 maybe. We'll see how that looks. Text small, and yeah, let's do that. We'll call the. This is just going to be 4, and this is going to be for the URL. URL. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and create that. Ooh, we got to close this properly. And let's go ahead and create this input class name. And we'll go with this big, long kind of styling here. Let's see what this comes out with. So we'll have an input there, and that's going to go ahead and say this is the URL that we want to post to. And now we need some type of button, and look at that, our AI already knows that, which is great. And we say submit. I'm going to say start listening. Awesome. And I think that's all we really need there, right? So let's see what this looks like. All right, look at that. So now we have this interface. So if we refresh this, we're going to have nothing to begin with. We can input a contract address, hit next, boom, it lists out all of the events for that contract. We can select one, and then we can enter a URL for where we'd want to post once that event fires. And then we can click start listening. Now, clearly, when we hit start listening, nothing is happening yet. We need to create some type of object that we're going to go ahead and post to the backend. So let's see what we can do there. So let's go back to our code, and really we want to call a function when we click here. So we're going to say onClick equals, and we'll go ahead and make some type of event here, and we don't really need to use that event variable, I guess. Let's create a function called createListener. All right, and that function is going to get called whenever we click this button. So now if we go up here, and let's just define a createListener function. We'll prevent default on that. Then we don't need to do that at all, and we're not even passing in the event, are we? So we need to pass that in if we're going to prevent the default on it. And let's see if we're getting anywhere. So console.log, we are going to create a listener for this event. So let's go ahead and look at our console, and let's click, boom. We are going to create a listener for this event. Excellent. So now we're hitting that function. And now what we can do is we can basically build an object that we can use for us to send back to the backend. So this would contain things like the index that we've selected within this radio input, and the actual the URL, which we don't store the URL anywhere. So we probably want to do that, right? We want to be able to grab the URL, and we probably want to set some type of state on the input that was selected, right? So that we have all this data. We don't actually have any of this information just yet. So why don't we go ahead and do that? So here we're going to do the same exact thing, but we can go ahead and set the state on this. I think, didn't we do this above here? Some contract address. We did this over here. Yeah, so we're going to do the same exact pattern right here. So this on change, we're going to go ahead and set the URL. So let's go down here, and on change here, we're going to say set URL. Now we don't actually have a state variable for that yet. I'm going to go up here and say URL set URL equals use state. Boom. Awesome. So now every time we change that text field, we'll have an event here, and that is good. Okay, so now we have the URL being stored in state. We have the contract address, but we don't actually have the event the user selected yet. So I think what we need to do is we need to use another state variable to store the index in which we are going to eventually reference the event we selected. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new state variable called selected event, and we'll make it blank by default. And now we're going to follow that same exact pattern that we've been doing with all of our other field inputs here. We're going to basically say on change. I think this is going to be an on change. I don't know if there's going to be an on click. So yeah, this is an on change because this is a radio button. So what we're going to say is on change equals, actually we could just paste this in here and then say on change, and this is going to pass in an event, and e dot, what is this, selected dot value, I believe. I think that's this right thing, right? Is this oh, e dot target dot value, right? Target dot value. Now that should return the value of this index, and we don't want to create a listener. We want to set the selected event. Now this should set the selected event to the index of this input. So let's see if that works. So if we go here and we console.log the selected event, which we're doing here, and we have the selected event. Okay, let's see if this works. So if we go ahead and put in a contract address, throw this bad boy in there, we have a list of all the events. I'm going to say I want to know when a moonbird is nested, and we don't have to put anything in here. If I click, boom, ah, there we go, index 3. If we go here, it should be index 2, index 1, and index 0. Awesome. So now, and we have a little error up here, so I think I was wrong with that 4. It does need to be HTML4. So let's go and just fix that real quick, where we put the label, and that is, what do they want us to do? HTML4. Okay, that should get rid of that error, right? Good, good, good. Excellent. Beautiful. So now what we can do is, when we're in the create listener function, we can actually say, using the events array, we can index the events array by the selected event. And now when we look at this, we should get the object that contains all the information about the event. So the inputs, the name, and things like that. Awesome. So now we have all of the information we need to send back to the back end of our application so that we can register a listener, so that we can now start listening to these events for this contract. So I think we're at a good spot here. So now within this create listener function, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and build a object to send to the backend and register a listener. All right, so let's go ahead and just take a quick look at our architecture diagram here. So right now we have this front end piece pretty much in a shape that we could start to kind of move away from it and go into other components of our application. We do have it integrating with the API, so that's complete. And now what we need to do is we do need to figure out a way to interact with a database in order for us to store this information, in which then another program, what we're calling our event watcher, is going to then read from that database and listen for contract events. So in future videos, we're going to start to get a little bit more technical with some of the back-end stuff. So hopefully this will be fun. And yeah, so we're going to continue to build. And I think this is going to entail maybe another endpoint in our API. And we're probably going to use something like Google Firebase or something like that for our database layer, just to kind of keep it simple. We don't want to have to stand up a bunch of infrastructure for this project, like you know, maintaining a server and things like that. So let's try to do this as lean and clean as possible. Again, if you have any ideas, any comments, any suggestions, please post them below. If you're enjoying this content, please subscribe to the channel. I'm enjoying putting these together, and it's kind of it's challenging a little bit, so I'm kind of enjoying that challenge. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Oh, and I did post the code on GitHub, so the link is in the comments below. All right, talk to you later.